What's up, guys? Welcome back to the KRW Podcast, episode 4, I believe. We have a whole lot of stuff to cover today. Just in a moment, we're going to be talking about Carry On 2. If you don't know what that is, I wouldn't necessarily blame you, but it's pretty striking. As well as we're also going to be talking about Will Smith's career trajectory as of late and where he's going. We're going to be sharing my grievances with the Dragon Ball franchise and a whole lot more. So please stick around for that. Again, like I'm going to say at the beginning of all of these things, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps with the channel. Liking it, commenting on it, having any discussions on anything that we talk about here, really appreciate it. It doesn't really cost you anything, but it means the world to me. So give me a like. All right, guys, I wanted to discuss this quote from Tanner Egerton about the possibility of Carry On 2, as well as where that movie sits in like pop cultural consciousness, as well as like what Netflix brings to the table when it comes to thriving movie franchises. So just to be clear, if you're not aware, Carry On is a Netflix movie that came out last December starring Taron Egerton, where he plays a TSA agent named Ethan who is dealing with kind of a blackmail situation where people are trying to do some kind of a terrorist attack on a plane and they're just trying to make it that he like lets a bag through. Like that's all it really is. It's a kind of a thrilling movie and certainly worth the watch. I think based on his comments and some of the data that came out from Netflix, it makes absolute 100% total sense why there would be a direct continuation or maybe even a potential franchise here. But it's interesting nonetheless. In my personal life, as well as literally on the internet, which is, at least from my perspective, the third space for pretty much everybody in modern culture, at least in the United States or Western culture these days, nobody has talked about this movie. Despite the fact that Carry On, at least from the last time that I saw any updated reports about its performance on Netflix, was literally the 5th most watched movie in all of Netflix's history. And at least at the time, Deadline was reporting that there was a significant amount of time left for that movie to surpass both the Bird Box and the Adam Project to become Netflix's 3rd most watched movie ever. And I have to say, guys, I have only ever seen one video on all of social media that had any sense of understanding what this movie was and was trying to make fun of it. What are we supposed to do with this? I feel like one of the problems that Netflix has right now, and I've covered this in multiple videos on the channel, but one of the problems they have is, despite the fact that pretty much everybody in the world can watch their content, nobody really resonates towards it unless there's something to actually get behind. I feel like Quentin Tarantino said it best when he said, I'm not picking on anyone, but apparently for Netflix, Ryan Reynolds has made $50 million on this movie and $50 million on that movie and $50 million on the next movie for them. Well, good for him that he's making so much money, but those movies don't exist in the zeitgeist. It's almost like they don't even exist. And that's kind of exactly what I'm talking about here. The idea that The Adam Project was one of Netflix's biggest movies of all time. And who remembers that? I feel like a lot of people remember the Bird Box movie at the time because there was a push at the time that a lot of people were memeing it, but there was allegations, like credible allegations, that Netflix was using a lot of paid people to go out and meme it and push those memes on social media so people would gravitate and watch the movie. Another caveat on that is the 6 or so years since Bird Box came out in 2018, Netflix has also rearranged what they count as a view. At the time, Netflix was touting Bird Box as pretty much their biggest debut movie ever, and the equivalent of that is, hey, if everybody who had watched the movie on Netflix had gone to see that in theaters, then the movie would have opened up worldwide to like $400 million, making it one of the biggest movies of all time. That was a crazy concept, but at the same time, people don't treat Netflix movies like they do with any theatrical film. That's been proven time and time and time again. Also, there's just that little bit of idea that they did make a sequel to Bird Box, and I would not be surprised if this is the first time you're hearing about it. Yeah, it's not necessarily a direct sequel, but it's at least a continuation within the same universe, and I never heard anyone talking about that movie, and I don't think it did very well. The point here that I'm making, as well as Quentin Tarantino, is nobody really gravitates towards a Netflix film. We don't focus on that as being a cultural touchstone or something that a lot of us sit down and talk about. Somehow, their television shows have more staying power, probably because there's more content to ingest, and Netflix has gone way overboard over the last couple of years, creating content that's meant to be passively viewed instead of actively watched and enjoyed by the masses. A lot of that is definitely worth diving into in another video, but I don't want to take too much time on it now. Anyway, a lot of that is just being a setup to the fact that Carry On is doing extremely well on Netflix, at least from the way that they're now tracking their views in 2024 and 2025. I feel like it's important to note now that Netflix has changed the way that it views its viewership metrics for movies and television shows in this modern era. For television shows, I believe they only really track the first 28 days of viewership for people who started the show and completed it, or at least watch time for that metric in order to determine how many people actively watch the show. To give some context here, because it's at least a little bit relevant, Netflix recently posted that Squid Game Season 2 reached their third of all time, being just slightly below the original Squid Game and Wednesday, the first season of Wednesday. And the thing is, they're not going to go back and tell anybody how many people are actively watching the first season of Squid Game in order to prepare or watching the second season. Just going back and literally re-binging all of it, because we are way past that first 28 days for the original Squid Game season, and they're just simply not counting it. It's not worth it for them to figure out how many people are watching and how much that's bringing in people to actively get subscriptions for Netflix, which I think is absolutely crazy, but it's just one of the things that they're doing. For movies, I think that timeline now is about 3 months. So when we're talking about Carry On, we're talking about a movie that grew in the charts to the top 10, to the top 5, and had about probably a month or two left to actively get people to watch, and likely is now probably the third highest watched movie of all time on Netflix. And again, nobody is talking about this movie at all. It might as well not exist. And yet it did extraordinarily well. I think Netflix must be happy with the viewership numbers that they've gotten, so much so that there must be some excitement from not just me, but a lot of other people that, hey, what if this is just Netflix's new Die Hard movie? So this brings me back to Egerton's quote when he was asked whether or not there's going to be a sequel to Carry On, where he said, "It's kind of like an extraordinary set of circumstances. So I think it would need a really innovative, creative idea to feel like a worthy idea for a sequel. But yeah, why not? Sequels worked for Die Hard, so who knows?" And this is why I am kind of obsessing about this. Netflix has talked about for years now that they want to be building active franchises. They have literally dominated in the streaming game. They have created cultural touchstones when it comes to television, whether we're talking about Wednesday or Stranger Things, Die Hard. Cobra Kai just ended, and people are still talking about it. It's a huge concept. They literally rejuvenized one of, like, a 40-year-old franchise. One of the biggest franchises of the 80s just came roaring back. And I know it didn't start on Netflix, but the point there is like, that show would never have been as big as it was if it wasn't for Netflix. Just the simple ideas, the fact of the matter. I mean, this year we're seeing the ending of You. You was a Lifetime show. That show would never have been as big as it was if it wasn't for Netflix. So they certainly can have cultural cachet when it comes to big television series. Like I said, maybe because TV just kind of goes on longer, people have more of a connection between the characters and they're not as passively watching them. So with a television series, that's something else, but when it comes to a movie, it's just like, just put it on, watch it in the background passively, and you're not overly focusing on it. Maybe that's the point here. But fuck, man, I feel like Netflix has been talking for years about wanting to build their own version of Star Wars or Harry Potter. Just a couple of years ago, one of their VPs was talking about wanting to build their own versions of these big popular franchises, but understanding the fact that, hey, it's going to take some time and we're going to kind of find our way along that path. And in the interim, they made The Atom Project, which could have been something, but like Tarantino said, you're giving Ryan Reynolds $50 million. You're not going to bring him back for a movie that, while doing well, had no cultural cachet. Same thing with bringing Ryan Reynolds, Gal Gadot, and The Rock back for a Red Notice sequel, let alone 2. That was a huge movie, like one of the biggest movies they've ever made. In fact, I think it is still the biggest movie they've ever made in terms of watch time, but nobody talks about that movie. Nobody wants a sequel to that movie because we watched it passively. Netflix cannot make movies like this anymore. And if there is a direction or some kind of path forward for something like Carry On to get a Die Hard-esque sequel that takes place during Christmas, is this big, bombastic, terrorist-laden kind of concept, that would be great. I would watch the heck out of that. But quite frankly, this is something that I have been mad about for years now, is the Netflix model, the streaming model as it were, has not delivered in any real meaningful way in the way that it really should, especially when it comes to movies. We should have had so many action series, just throwaway, fun-loving action series that we could watch almost on a yearly basis like Carry On since the beginning. Netflix should have created an active horror franchise, an icon as it were, that we could have had every single year for the next, like the past 5, 6, 7 years and still going forward. Like, quite frankly, like Netflix should have been on the cusp of, instead of Bloody Disgusting and all that, they should have gotten Art the Clown to be like, we have like 4 or 5 of them now, like 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever it is. Like, they could have done that. They kind of did that, or they're kind of doing that with the Fear Street franchise. Now we're getting a 4th film this May, but man, like they had to pick up the first 3 films from Fox or whoever it was and then release them on that platform, let it linger for so long that maybe people aren't really going to care. It is infuriating. And I would absolutely love that if Carry On became this Die Hard-esque franchise for Netflix. We're getting one like every 1 or 2 years or something, and he just keeps getting in these weird situations, trying to build his family and making everything work, but he has to keep thwarting terrorist attacks. Seriously, why aren't we getting this every single year? That's the model here. That's exactly what people want. But again, it's like Tarantino said, they're spending so much money on these things that are just useless. Even if everybody watches them, they're useless. Nobody's talking about them. Nobody even really cares. And it's mind-boggling, and I feel like it's one of the reasons why Netflix is failing as a streamer to really impact culture and to really kind of move the needle in terms of what people are talking about and what people want to see. I know they have some cultural cachet. I know that they can pull the weight of like their cultural movements in one direction or another. It's the concept. It's what we saw with the Mike Tyson fight. They're now putting live streaming sports and everything else on Netflix. They're trying video games. They're trying everything that they can possibly get done with this. But quite frankly, it reinforces the point that I was trying to make in a previous video that I put out. Despite their algorithms and despite the amount of audience they have that can actively look to watching this, that, or the other, despite the marketing pushes that they can give to things that they actively want to succeed, despite the amount of money they're willing to pay like actively big stars like Ryan Reynolds or Egerton or whoever to come back and do a sequel here or there or whatever, Netflix cannot actively blow the winds in one direction or another. If people are going to watch Carry On during the holiday season, ultimately that comes off as a fluke. They don't care. They don't know what's going to hit. And if it hits too late, especially for a movie, you can't come back and just recreate that magic. You can't get it on a system where people expect it now because, again, the streaming wars are over. We're kind of in a situation where people aren't expecting Netflix to make sequels to their big movies unless they're rom-coms or something, or maybe even like one of those Christmas movies knockoffs they're trying to do from Lifetime or, whatever. And honestly, I feel like I'm not really making myself clear here. Carry On is a good movie. You should probably watch it if you haven't seen it, and maybe just wait for next Christmas. It's a good Christmas film, at least, when you have nothing else going on, you have time off of work, and you want to just sit down, relax, and watch a thrilling, fun film. Then yeah, it's completely worth it. But quite frankly, Netflix isn't going to be able to capitalize on this, despite the fact that it was just this wild success in the background that no one talks about. And I feel like that's the problem. This year, we're finally getting an Old Guard sequel. Who the hell cares about an Old Guard anymore? I mean, my wife does, but regardless, nobody really cares and nobody really remembers it. It was cool at the time. There was literally seeds planted with what's going to happen next week, and then 6 years later. So that's kind of my perspective here. Netflix is dropping the ball on any conceivable cachet they have, any kind of cultural zeitgeist that they can create. And a lot of this is because they don't know what's going to hit. They don't give any meaningful thought into what they have at any given time. They actively just put things out on their platform and things hit. They pop off and they have to play catch up. And I think one of the reasons that is for the series, they can kind of play catch up better for something like Stranger Things, Squid Games, Wednesday, Monster, whatever it is, because a television series will ultimately hold people's attention longer than just a 2 hour or an hour and a half type of movie. I don't know why they're making movies anymore, guys. If this is their model, if this is the way they want to approach it, I don't know. Give me a Carry On sequel, give me a Carry On Die Hard-esque type of franchise, all for it. More Fear Street, more of all that. But the way they've approached all of this is just pathetic. All right, guys, we knew that we were going to have to talk about this eventually. So a couple of days ago, news came out that Kathleen Kennedy was going to be retiring from Lucasfilm as head of Lucasfilm. And obviously, all of the wrong people got the wrong idea from this, and obviously we're celebrating, literally so many videos talking about how people won. And it's just, I don't necessarily want to get into that, because the thought is those people are usually pretty wrong about these things, and they're just doing it for hate bait farming, just to line their pocketbooks. That's literally what it is. The truth is that if there is one big issue with Star Wars, it's not Kathleen Kennedy, it's Disney trying to push this brand that was always supposed to be, something that we got every couple of decades, every couple of years or something, and was only really supposed to be on the big screen, not necessarily being pushed in all ways in games, comic books, television, and everything else down our throats at every given moment. They just tried to expand it too quickly, and too much of an interconnection between all of the various storylines. It just didn't work, and quite frankly, this is something I want to talk about in the future. The idea that any type of extended universe, and whether or not it can work if it's trying to be too adherent to its own canon, even though Star Wars isn't, it certainly is, because everything is connected. Again, more on that in another day. But the point here being, Kathleen Kennedy is not retiring, at least not anytime soon. She did a recent interview to kind of clarify some stuff, as well as talk about the future of Star Wars, so I wanted to get into that right now. Starting off the interview by saying, the truth is, and I just want to say out loud and clear, I am not retiring. I will never retire from movies. I will die making movies. That's the first thing that's important to say. I'm not retiring. What's happening at Lucasfilm is I have been talking for quite some time with both Bob and Alan about what eventually succession might look like. She goes on to say that that's not a done deal. They don't know who's going to be her immediate successor, although it might be Jon Favreau. That would be my guess if I had to put money on it. Just because of how he's been at the forefront of so many things that have been successful for Disney over the last couple of decades, being one of the defining factors that made the MCU what it is at the very beginning, and then kind of showing that Disney Plus can have a huge hit with The Mandalorian, right as that streaming service took off. I guess we're going to have to wait and see how The Mandalorian and Grogu does, but quite frankly, he's my pick. I don't think it's going to be Kevin Feige. He has too much going on with trying to rebrand the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a dominant force in entertainment again, which might be too big of a task. And then maybe not Dave Filoni. Obviously, he was the best in terms of the lore, but some of the things that they've given him, at least on the television front, just haven't really worked with the general audience. Maybe some big fans, but not necessarily the general audience. Anyway, I would actually love to have that conversation in the comments, but let's just move on. The big point about this particular video or this discussion that Kathleen Kennedy had was to inform everybody about the current state of Star Wars and what we can expect to see in the coming future. Obviously, here in the next couple of weeks, we're going to get season 2 of Andor, and we know we have Ahsoka season 2 coming out sometime in the future. I'm not entirely sure when that's supposed to drop. But other than that, not a whole lot on the calendar until Mandalorian and Grogu in 2026. So yeah, what is the next big thing, especially on the big screen when it comes to Star Wars? Well, according to Kathleen Kennedy, Sean Levi's Star Wars movie will be the next after Mandalorian and Grogu, which we haven't heard a ton about other than it's supposed to be standalone and that Ryan Gosling is supposed to be starring. When they first said that this was moving forward, they at least indicated that if they can get Ryan Gosling to star in the movie, it was going to be fast-tracked. But quite frankly, it's been just a couple of years since they started talking about James Mangold's Jedi Origins movie or the Rey New Order Jedi movie that they've been talking about and maybe even pushing in one direction or another for the last couple of years, making it either Simon Kinberg's trilogy or maybe that original thing that was supposed to take place 15 years after The Rise of Skywalker. There's just a lot of ambiguity on what the future of the franchise is, especially things that take place immediately after The Rise of Skywalker. Well, that's why this is important, because apparently even though the Sean Levi movie is a standalone film with Ryan Gosling starring, it is going to be taking place after Rise of Skywalker. So there's at least that. We are finally moving forward in the timeline instead of focusing on this New Republic era that the television shows have been swimming around in for pretty much the last 5 years. But other than that, I don't think we have a whole lot of understanding of what this movie is going to be about, what it's going to be focusing on, and what it ultimately means for the future of the series. My guess would be is that the Mandalorian and Grogu movie is going to do its best to end, or at least set up the ending of this New Republic era from the television shows so they can kind of forget about that. And that this Sean Levi movie is going to reintroduce the world to a new Star Wars canon, or at least a new concept of what Star Wars can be on a theatrical level. Possibly even getting into a point where Star Wars is going to be taking a huge step back from television and focusing more on cinematic offerings. And that's kind of the implication that Kennedy gave too when she talked about what was coming after the Sean Levi movie and the Mandalorian and Grogu, talking about the future and how Simon Kinberg's trilogy that we talked about recently is possibly the next big thing after this. She said, this is the next iteration, the next new saga that moves us into the future. And like we've discussed on this channel before, there's a lot of back and forth about what that means for the future of the franchise, considering the fact that the new Jedi Order movie, the one with Rey set 15 years after the Rise of Skywalker, that was supposed to be a bridge into the new era of Star Wars. But a lot of people have been reporting that the new Simon Kinberg trilogy is supposed to be somewhat of a next generation type of movie, using Rey as kind of an Obi-Wan Kenobi role and moving on from the Skywalker concept entirely. That's just going to be the future of Star Wars. And you know what? I do have a couple of things to say about that, but I do want to just get through the rest of these updates about where Star Wars is going, at least on television and cinematic front for the future, before we get into some of my criticisms about the future of this franchise. So in this interview, Kathleen Kennedy went on to talk about the New Republic era, which we've already talked about, being at least the current era that we are in right now in terms of the television shows. And like I said, there's some implication that that's going to be being phased out here in the next coming years. with Mandalorian and Grogu and Ahsoka Season 2 and everything else like that. It's not that they're going to forget about that entirely, but it's certainly not going to be the focus going forward. She gave some implication of what's happening with the James Mangold movie, just saying that he's very busy with all this other stuff right now and he just can't focus on Star Wars. The same thing she said about Taika Waititi coming into Star Wars and doing his movie, saying that, yeah, he's writing it on the side, but nothing is really happening because he's just so busy doing all this other stuff and it's hard to tie him down. Other than that, Kathleen Kennedy didn't give any implication of what's happening with the Rey Skywalker movie that was announced 2 years ago. And I just don't really know what to think about this. It's not that I love the sequel trilogy. I don't know a whole lot of people who do. But Daisy Ridley did her best with that role, and I feel like there's at least something there. I think a lot of people understand that when it comes to viability of characters that were introduced within the sequel trilogy, other than Finn, Rey's probably the biggest type of character that you can take and move on with a new movie or something in between. And quite frankly, the implication that a Simon Kinberg trilogy is going to regulate Rey as like kind of this old wise woman to a much younger cast doesn't necessarily betray what Star Wars is supposed to be, but I feel like it's just moving the needle further than it needs to go. We never really got any meaningful continuation of Han, Luke, or Leia, especially after Return of the Jedi, and that's probably because Lucas just couldn't think of a meaningful idea. He had a plan in mind that was just kind of coming together very slowly. Couldn't get the funding. I mean, there was just a myriad of reasons as to why we waited so long to do a sequel trilogy where all three of our main characters were way out of their prime by the time they came back. We don't really have that problem now. And the idea of picking up after the sequel trilogy, even though a lot of people do hate it, myself kind of included, there's something interesting about that. And I feel like there's a lot of potential there to make a good movie. Because look, if there's one thing that I am very much passionate about, or at least understand, is anything can be good. You just need the right people behind it and telling the right story. The first three movies of this franchise do not define Rey as a character, so you can be reintroduced to the audience because at this point, so many years have passed, people know about her, they might not fully remember the sequel trilogy and how much of a bad taste that left in their mouth. And if they go to see a decent film, then, that heals all wounds and they're getting excited for what's coming next. And it feels like a direct continuation of the things that we saw just, a decade ago. To me, that makes a lot of sense, and I would love to see that as the main focal point going forward. Not just simply jumping directly into the future with a completely new story, a completely new protagonist, and no longer within that Skywalker saga. I mean, obviously, we're not necessarily in the Skywalker saga now because Rey isn't technically a Skywalker, but tell me in the comment section below if you agree with any of this. But quite frankly, when it comes to the continuation of Star Wars, I was excited more than anything about that Rey movie because I feel like there's potential there to change people's minds about the continuation of these characters. Not necessarily going back and looking at it with nostalgia goggles and saying, yeah, the sequel trilogy was better than what people were talking about. It isn't. In the same way that the prequels aren't as good as all the Gen Z and everybody talks about right now, like, oh, those are great. No, they're not. But if the prequels have kind of taught us anything, is that all the stuff made around them, that is what creates the nostalgia. Like, there's a lot of really good content set in the era that those movies are based around, or at least kind of connected to, where people watch the Clone Wars, people watch all of this stuff, or read the comic books or stuff that's set in between those time periods that those movies are based. And that kind of gives them more of a context of how to go back and rewatch those three movies and gives them more of an appreciation for what they were trying to do. Setting a movie 15 years later after the sequels might not necessarily do that, or might not be the catalyst of that, but you do get to a point where you start doing enough good things within that era and with these characters that people are going to go back and look at the sequel trilogy with more nostalgia than they did when they were initially watching it when it was coming out in 2015 onward. That's my perspective here. And that's one of the reasons I would love to see a continuation with Rey in that regard, and not necessarily what Simon Kinberg has been planning, or at least the leaks that have been coming out with that. All that being said, I just wanted to cover very briefly what Daisy Ridley said about the upcoming new Jedi Order movie, and how, at least if Kathleen Kennedy is not going to talk about it, at least there is some movement in that regard, and this movie is still seemingly being written. They haven't just thrown it away entirely. So, getting back to her quote, Ridley says, "I don't think it's the next thing I go to production on, because I'm supposed to be doing, oh no, it's not, because I'm doing something next month. Very excitingly. So it's not the next thing production-wise, but the script is being written and I'm very excited." She goes on to say that she hasn't read the newest part of the script yet, but she's at least aware of where the story is going, and that the people around the script are very talented. Again, I feel like this is something that should have had way more development on it, as at this point, they announced it just a couple of years ago. I mean, it doesn't take that long to make a movie unless you're Blade. But quite frankly, that brings us back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this video. Kathleen Kennedy has announced a ton of movies and television shows and projects when it comes to the continuation of Star Wars, and very few of them have come to fruition. The idea that Star Wars is supposed to be this huge spectacle, or that Disney and Lucasfilm have any real meaningful plan about what to do with this franchise going forward, goes out the door when pretty much everything you have, every person that you get attached, every thing that you announce kind of blows up in your face. Kathleen Kennedy in this recent interview might not be talking about retiring anytime soon or immediately announcing the date where she's going to leave Lucasfilm, but it's just the same as everything else that we've seen thus far. She's coming back and saying, hey, you know, all that stuff we've been talking about for literally years now. Well, it's still happening in the background, but it's just not coming together as fast as we want. And the problem with that is this is just such a reoccurring theme when it comes to anything that Lucasfilm has talked about or announced or done within the last over a decade now. Ever since Disney bought Lucasfilm for $4 billion, there's been so much projects that they've wanted to do and have done that just either fall apart before they even begin or fall apart during the production itself. And even though I do not appreciate a lot of the people who focus on Kennedy as the bane of their existence or the person who destroyed Star Wars, there is no denying the fact that she is the head of Lucasfilm, and there's been considerable problems, more so than a lot of other comparable movie studios or big Universal franchises as of late. Like, there's been a whole lot of problems, and maybe that falls on her feet because she's the head of this organization, but there's just something wrong with Lucasfilm. So, quite frankly, a successor to her, someone who can get the reins back and start making Star Wars exciting again, is something that I would love to see. My only problem is I would love to see some kind of continuation or rehabilitation of the sequel trilogy, because that's what they decided to do. I don't want them to retcon it. I just want them to make it retroactively meaningful or exciting. Maybe not just to me or me at all, but like at least the younger generations growing up with it. You only have so many times that you can make a first impression. And the idea that the Simon Kinberg trilogy is just going to kind of forget the sequel trilogy altogether and move on with something new, that's fine, but Star Wars has never been that big of a universe. It's always been a family story. Continue with the people that we understand, or at least we know right now, and give them a meaningful future, a meaning beyond what was seen in those 3 films. That's just my thoughts. Tell me in the comments section below what y'all's thoughts here are, because I'm interested in having this discussion. Alright guys, so let's talk about Dragon Ball. Now, Dragon Ball Daima just ended with a bang. We got the canonized introduction of Super Saiyan 4 Goku. We got a canonized Vegeta Super Saiyan 3. And frankly, if this series gave us anything at all, it was a massive amount of lore in the Demon Realm. I mean, quite frankly, as the fan of the series, we won. I think we won when it comes to any meaningful continuation of the series, giving us something that, from my perspective, is interesting. Like, kind of, okay, this is something that we continue to explore. This is something that is bigger than Universe 7, or at least the Earth, right? And we're seeing more characters and more situations that could be further explored or more impactful in the future. That being said, I can't help but feel like we're kind of resting on our laurels here. One of the things that has been happening over the last several years, ever since, I guess you would say, like, the real new information from Dragon Ball Super, technically the Battle of Gods movie in 2013, and then Fukkatsu no F in 2015, 2017, I can't remember exactly the year, tell me in the comments, but ever since those movies came out, then we got the reintroduction of the manga and the Dragon Ball Super anime. And then nothing really new in terms of lore or content or anything until we got to the Universe 6 tournament, which, introduced the concept of, hey, there's Saiyans in Universe 6, there's Hit, there's Frost, there's all these things that are similar, but it opened up the door for more things in the future. Right? More new, original, and interesting things. And then from that arc onward, there's been this weird obsession with giving fans pretty much everything that they've ever wanted, or canonizing things that didn't need to be the focus of Dragon Ball for the future. Dragon Ball Super brought back Future Trunks. It brought back Frieza. It gave us Evil Goku. It canonized Broly. It gave us a new form akin to Super Saiyan 2 Gohan with Gohan Beast. And then, it gave Piccolo a power-up. Now we're giving Goku Super Saiyan 4 in a canonized version. We're giving Vegeta Super Saiyan 3 after all this time. And with the passing of Akira Toriyama, there's not a whole lot to anticipate what's going to happen with this franchise moving forward. I mean, yes, we do have the implication that the manga is going to continue, but let's focus on that for a second, because the manga, or Dragon Ball Super as a whole, began with this implication. Like, really began, not just an adaptation of these movies that they put out a couple of years before the series really came roaring back to life. But Dragon Ball Super kind of focused on this idea that, hey, up until this point with Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, just the original series as a whole, we were focusing on Earth. And yes, we went to Namek or this place every now and then, or focused on these aliens, whatever. But the thought was everything happening on Earth was what was important. Dragon Ball Super kind of opened up the door here, and Daima did as well, where, hey, there's this entire multiverse out here. There's the Super Dragon Balls that aren't just in Universe 7, they're in Universe 6, and all these different gods, big, powerful people that can potentially exist in any universe. And not just the Pride Troopers with Toppo and Jiren, but also the 4 universes that didn't participate in the Tournament of Power. Like, there was a lot of stuff to explore there, and stuff that was really exciting. And now we're going to be focusing on Granola. Again, interesting concepts, interesting ways of exploring the lore of the series, bringing back Granola and all that stuff, right? I mean, akin to what we've seen before in Dragon Ball GT and otherwise, like literally just canonizing things that we had seen before, but still interesting nonetheless. Problem is we went from a potential multiverse story, or focusing on stories set in Universe 6, Vegeta finally going to Planet Sadala, or doing anything outside of Universe 7 or Earth itself. We kind of, at least over the last several years, have thrown a lot of that away, went back to focusing entirely on Earth, and focusing again on Universe 7. Everything important is happening in Universe 7, and there's no stories or villains or anything else that even remotely exists in any other place besides this particular universe, despite everything that was introduced in Dragon Ball Super and even Daima. And quite frankly, this is part of this rant here, is what is the absolute future of Dragon Ball? One of the last major things that happened in Dragon Ball Super's manga was the introduction of Black Frieza, which is cool on its face, but nobody wants to see Frieza be the antagonist again. If anything, he's just kind of this anti-hero who doesn't really care about Goku and Vegeta anymore and is always going to pop up and do his own thing. It's really cool that the manga is also focusing on Goten and Trunks, but nobody's really appreciated that, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Meanwhile, Dragon Ball Daima was just a 20-episode mini-story that introduced a lot of lore and interesting concepts, but was really primarily focusing on just giving people some awesome new transformations that we can salivate and sell toys over. Dragon Ball has been resting on its laurels for almost a decade now. not doing anything to move the needle forward, tell a new and interesting story, or explore any meaningful avenue of the universe or multiverse, as it were, despite every tease that it's made in that direction. And again, I guess I'm not necessarily saying that any continuation of Dragon Ball would work, depending on characters or setting or anything else like that. A couple years ago, I might have said I wanted to see a hit special akin to the Bardock Father of Goku or the Future Trunks special they did back in the old days. Or something on Planet Sadala, something with Frost, something in Universe 6 altogether. Like, there's a lot of really interesting concepts and characters there that are close enough to the things that we're seeing in Universe 7 that it wouldn't be so much of a culture shock. But maybe something with the Pride Troopers? They were interesting, and I would love to see them explored a little bit more. But no, we've been focusing on Goku and Vegeta, which makes a whole lot of sense. They're the protagonists of this series. But we're not utilizing their friendship with Beerus and Whis or, Zeno or anybody else to pull them outside of their immediate home where, Namek's in trouble again. We've seen that before. Earth's in trouble again. We've seen all this before. Universe 7 is in trouble. The Dragon Balls are being used. Despite, the Super Dragon Balls having never really been used in an antagonistic sense other than what we saw in the Tournament of Power, and that didn't really amount to much anyway. And while all this is interesting to me, I do understand that Dragon Ball wasn't really made for me. At least not being made for me right now. It was made for me when I was a child. This is a child's anime. They're trying to sell toys. They're trying to give people something worthy of being excited about, and I understand that. I appreciate that. I just, it's kind of sad that I grew up with this thing. I love it to death, and I don't get to see it evolve in any real meaningful way. In fact, it seems like pretty much everything they're doing now, every decision they're making, is a cynical cash grab that's giving the fans, pretty much, I think, I'm just going to say the dumbest fans, what they've wanted for this entire time. Ooh, evil Goku with Zamasu, that arc sucked. The manga was a little bit better, but the anime just went back and forth, and it went way too long. Not a satisfying ending, and quite frankly, a very weird one. It just sucked. Tournament of Power was really good, but it didn't use its concept very well, and Universe 7 ended up beating pretty much every single universe, so what was the point there? There was no real tension being pushed. Again, it's a TV show for children, I understand, but give me this little bit of a rant here. Moro and Granola, really interesting ideas, but doesn't really move the needle forward in any meaningful way. Daima, the same way. Ultimately just going to be remembered for breaking the internet with Super Saiyan 4's introduction. We know what Super Saiyan 4 was. We know that was always going to be brought back. Then they're bringing back Broly, they're bringing back Cell, they're bringing back Frieza with multiple different transformations, and nothing is really moving in any real way that makes me feel like there's any real continuation happening here. That we're just spinning our wheels, we're spinning in circles, and that's just what Dragon Ball is now. And now that Toriyama's gone, he's probably likely one of the reasons why Daima had so much lore involved with it. But now that he's gone, what are they going to do? Are they just going to give Broly Super Saiyan 3 now? They're going to continue to give us new fusions that they can put in video games and make toys on. They're going to give us Black Frieza, but Black Frieza is going to be the main antagonist of the next arc because people will pay to see Frieza fight. That's the type of stuff that I'm anticipating for the future of Dragon Ball. And even though I'm still a fan, and even though I'm still, I'll watch Daima, I'll continue reading the manga when I can, and all of that, I have to say, it's a little bit frustrating, and I wish more for this series that I absolutely love. But I don't think we're going to get that. I think that this is our lot in life, and if you love the series and if you're my age or older, we just have to get comfortable with that and understand that that's exactly the direction that we're heading in. I wish I was wrong. I wish there was more to say here, and I wish there was more to be excited about going forward, but I don't see that happening. I want to hear your thoughts and opinions about this in the comments section, though. If you want to talk to me about this, make sure to like the video or dislike the video. I don't really care. If you think I'm wrong, tell me why. Quite frankly, I'd love to have this conversation because I don't talk about Dragon Ball enough on this or any other channel, and it's been more exciting as of late than recently. With the reintroduction of the new game, Sparkling Zero, and then Daima and everything, there's a lot to discuss. Okay, guys, so Will Smith has been in the news a lot recently, and I feel like it's important to talk about. I'm going to call this his sellout era. Not in the sense that I'm going to try to put the guy down or really kind of poke fun at him for lack of original ideas or kind of the waning of his star power. The point here is I'm kind of more interested to see where this goes. If you know anything about me, you know that I am a big proponent of like anything can be good. I would like a sequel to pretty much everything. I'm that guy kind of putting up the posters like, hey, like I'm calling for a sequel for literally everything that's ever been made because I like continuations of stories. I mean, it is what it is. But with that being said, I'm kind of shocked with everything that we've been hearing about with him recently. Obviously, the continuation of the Bad Boys franchise because the last two movies in that universe have done so incredibly well. And then also back in 2022, we got word that they were going to do an I Am Legend 2 finally. After all of the stops and starts from that original sequel pitch that was going to be a prequel before, and then, it just kind of fell apart, but then Michael B. Jordan blew up and Will Smith and him were going to work together. It's a whole thing, but we haven't really heard a whole lot since then, but we'll talk about a little bit of the updates that Will Smith gave us just in a second. But now we're getting kind of a 1-2 punch with maybe another Hancock movie and another Hitch movie. There's a lot to discuss here about Will Smith being a character actor, probably one of the most successful character actors of the 21st century, kind of selling out and making sequels to some of his biggest movies, whether we ask for it or not. So like I said, we're going to go over some quotes about him working with Michael B. Jordan on I Am Legend 2, but I just wanted to focus primarily on Hancock 2, where Will Smith stated, Hancock 2, yeah, they're leaking all my information. So yeah. So there's a really cool Hancock 2 idea, but we haven't talked about it. So I'm going to give you one little piece. Zendaya's will be approached for a role in Hancock 2. So Zendaya is going to be the next Awkwafina of pretty much all Hollywood, right? Somebody who kind of shows up in every single movie, regardless of whether you want them to or not. Not that she's a bad actress. She's actually a very good actress, and I would love to see her in more things. It's just kind of crazy when people start popping up in literally everything. That being said, Hancock 2 is kind of a good idea. The fact that the original came out in 2008 and they haven't done anything with it, and that first movie really started off incredibly strong, but then petered out in the end. It just never really felt very cohesive, and the idea that you have this superpowered person where everyone around him is not superpowered, and pretty much the only real antagonistic force in that movie is his toxic relationship with Charlize Theron. But despite that, the movie still had the need to have some kind of a superhero concept to it. So you just have like regular thieves and gangster members and stuff going after him time after time after time. And the ideas that they had that would work at some level just kind of eventually working because of some unfortunate aspect of his powers or literally his emotional relationship is creeping up on them and they would have no way of knowing. The movie just kind of fell apart, and the idea of doing a sequel never really made sense because they didn't set it up as there are more people like them or there's some other antagonizing force that would be able to take on literal Superman. But again, I think that there might be something there about probably dealing with a teenage daughter. Not that Zendaya always has to play a teenager, but I guess that's just her lot in life. Her and Tom Holland, that's just what they're going to play until the end of time. But the idea of having a teenager dealing with all of these powers, probably a long-lost child or forgotten child between Will Smith and Charlize Theron, having been kind of away from them, forgotten about, and not aging, because when all these people are apart, they do not age and they don't really have any weaknesses. Maybe the fact that she's now kind of coming to her own terms, trying to figure out what's going on in her life and starts causing any ruckus, and she's the big supervillain with all the same powers, and Will Smith and Charlize Theron having to fight her, getting closer, all of them kind of losing their powers and feeling okay about themselves. To me, that's something that might make sense, but again, is it enough to justify making another movie, especially one that's going to be almost 20 years after the fact of the original coming out? Personally, I'm not sure that's enough, but hey, if you want to discuss that in the comments below, we can certainly do that. Another one, and I'm not going to take a whole lot of time about this, is we're hearing that he's going to make another Hitch movie, which what that is, I have no idea. I love Hitch. I felt like it was a perfect kind of culmination of Will Smith as a character actor, one of the most charismatic, fun actors, especially of the early 21st century and 2000s. And not that it really matters anyway, but I mean, if you want a sequel to Hitch, or at least a spiritual sequel, then just go watch the Aladdin remake that they did with Guy Ritchie just a couple of years ago. Because Will Smith as the genie is the best part of that movie. He didn't try to redo what Robin Williams did. He just kind of played Hitch again in the exact same format that original Hitch movie was. And yeah, it just kind of worked on that term because Will Smith's charisma, at least, up until all of the drama recently, it just leaks off of the screen, and there's a reason why people have loved him for as long as they have. That being said, it's probably been too long for another Hitch movie. If you want to do something akin to that, just do another Aladdin movie. That movie made over $1 billion. People would be excited to see it. I think I would be excited to see it. And now just moving on, because this one is a little bit more exciting to me, that we're finally getting a little bit more news about this supposed sequel to I Am Legend, which the original movie back in 2007 ended kind of abruptly. It's based off a book and multiple different adaptations of this novel from television as well as movies. The idea that Will Smith's character is the concept of a legend. He's the vampire to these zombie vampire things, and he's the one who doesn't sacrifice himself at the end. He realizes the error of his ways. He gives back the wife that the main guy is coming after and looking for, and then they just go off. There's no blood cure or anything else like that. That was the original ending they shot, and then it didn't test well, or people didn't understand it, so they changed it to have a more heroic ending where Will Smith sacrifices himself but gives the woman and her boy, again, it's been a while, but he gives them his blood in order to make an antidote to kind of save the human race. And yeah, that just never really sat well with me. That whole movie was very good up until those two characters just showing up out of nowhere. So when they initially were talking about a sequel, it wasn't a sequel, it was a prequel that would focus on Will Smith living alone in New York and trying to survive with his dog. And I felt like that was a really cool concept, something that I would have loved to explore, especially with kind of them throwing a wrench in any kind of real sequel with Will Smith involved, right? So I feel like this is one of the reasons why this particular pitch is at least a little bit exciting for me as well as most people. Because one of the things that came out of the gate is that we are not using the theatrical ending for the movie. We are going to use the ending that we originally shot and that we cut and that most people probably don't know about. But we're going to use that one where Will Smith's character survives and, now here we are 20 years later. So with just that context out of the way, let's get into what Will Smith was talking about with Michael B. Jordan and I Am Legend 2. He said, "Me and Michael B. Jordan, we sat down for about a week, just went through character stuff. Akiva Goldsman is the writer, so he's just putting it together. So that's a real thing. I'd love to work with Jordan. He really gets it. I work with a lot of young actors and young performers, and it's like there's a difference between actors and movie stars, right? So actors can come in and do their part well. A movie star understands the whole machine and knows how to present themselves all the way from the concept of an idea to delivery on the red carpet in 190 plus countries in the world. So there's a scope of understanding that Michael B. Jordan has that everyone doesn't have. So this isn't really an indicator of anything other than, yeah, we're still working on this concept, even though it was announced back in 2022. They're at least still meeting about it. They're talking about it. They're writing it. They're trying to get everything together. And it's not like Will Smith and Michael B. Jordan aren't busy. They're incredibly busy. I would love to talk about Michael B. Jordan working on Creed 4 sometime soon, because he did talk about that recently, and I have a whole lot to say on it. But with that being said, I do like the idea that Will Smith is looking at Michael B. Jordan as kind of a successor of what he was doing in the early 2000s. The idea that this guy is going to pick up the mantle and become a real star, not just an IP figure, not someone who can just put out sequel after sequel after sequel. He can bring characters to life, do diversified amount of movies that all make money because people show up to see Michael B. Jordan. I think that's interesting because, like I said at the beginning of this video, I think Will Smith is kind of at the late stages of his career. He's won an Oscar. He's pretty much been at the top of the mountain, and there's probably no way that he can get back there. So maybe the best way for him forward is, like I said, the sellout era. Make movies or sequels or continuations, produce things that you have some kind of tangible connection to. We've talked about Hitch, we've talked about I Am Legend, we've talked about Hancock 2. He's going to do Bad Boys 5. He can do Aladdin 2. There's so many movies that Will Smith has done over the course of his entire career where people would be interested, if nothing else, to see him come back and do something like that. I mean, quite frankly, the guy teased everyone about coming into the Matrix franchise now that they're going to do a 5th film, even though that was just kind of a weird promotion for his song. That being said, it would be really interesting if somehow he gets involved with that franchise. The guy has a lot of cachet. I've already talked about him having a ton of charisma. It would be interesting to see him pop up in franchise galore pretty much until the twilight of his career, because I think he's earned it. And I would like to see these movies. Maybe I'm the only one here. I'll go see Hancock 2. I'll see all of these things. But I wanted to kind of talk about this in order to hear what y'all have to say about it. Do you want to see more sequels from Will Smith, or do you think he's better off doing more original movies or dramatic movies or whatever he has done that you've liked over the last couple of decades? Let's discuss this in the comment section below. All right, guys, I wanted to talk just briefly about these leaks that we got for Avengers Doomsday. Not necessarily about what they show us or what it could potentially mean for that movie or the future of the MCU. If you want that analysis, I'm sure there's a lot of people online who can go and talk about the Hulk pictures or the Young Avengers or whatever it is. But I wanted to kind of focus on certain things that I've been seeing people talk about when it comes to this leak and how people react to spoilers or rampant speculation about their upcoming movies fascination, or just how we interact with each other about upcoming blockbuster films. And I haven't really seen it put in such a way as Luis Fernando, who, quite frankly, I talk about box office stuff here on the channel from time to time. It's one of my passions. I follow it pretty religiously on a day-to-day basis, and a lot of people on Twitter are really good for that, box office analysis or just kind of figuring out what's going on in the industry. One of those people is Luis Fernando, who I follow. I love his content, and I do like to keep up with what his perspectives are, at least in the entertainment industry. And he had something to say about these particular leaks that I thought was worth going over and talking about my perspectives here. So I'll put his Twitter page in the description section below so you can go check him out, follow him, interact with this particular tweet, and get your perspective on how he sees the industry. With that being said, he tweeted, "It's becoming so frustrating, this obsessed behavior from fandoms nowadays. As if it wasn't bad enough wanting to know everything about a movie before it was out, are we now literally spoiling movies even before they get made like it was the most normal thing? With no pushbacks, no complaints, we are all literally just okay with people telling us a movie plot before it's even filmed in the open? What kind of people are these, for Lord's sake? And what about the studios? When are they back with those DMCAs? Now more than ever, they feel necessary." And then people talk about comic book movie fatigue. Obviously, if you already know everything that will happen in the films 2 years before and discuss every aspect of it for the whole period leading to its release, small wonder why you don't feel hyped enough / don't care as much when it's finally out. But one factor that kills me every time is when one of these obsessed ones, on top of all of that, comes to X after the movie is finally released, only to say, quote, "It was too predictable. Those movies don't know how to surprise us anymore." Like, are you the one going after every single detail even before the film starts filming? My blood literally boils. I've got no patience for these people anymore. This is something I've been wanting to talk about for years now. Spoiler culture is something that has ballooned in the last decade or so on social media. And quite frankly, my big brain conspiracy-minded perspective here is no one really cares. I mean, I don't really know how to express this, but I don't think anybody really cares about spoilers. I think we're told to care about spoilers, and that's what the vast majority of people have been expressing online or in person over the last couple years. That the people with money to interest, the people who benefit from as many people going in blind to a movie or something, like those people are pushing the narrative to be like, hey, don't understand what's going to happen in this movie. Don't talk about what's going to happen in this movie. Go in and experience it for yourself. And, then talk about it all you want or tell your friends to go see it, but don't tell them what's in it, that type of stuff. And quite frankly, I know that's crazy. I know it's not exactly what's going on, but I feel like it's something we have to at least fold in with the overall discussion when it comes to spoilers, because quite frankly, and tell me in the comment section if you think I'm wrong here, but I don't go into a movie or TV show or anything else and come out feeling like I had a terrible time because a certain plot point or certain things that happened with a character or whatever, because that was spoiled for me. In fact, I feel like I have a better idea of how I felt about it, knowing what was going to happen before I go into that story and coming out and seeing, okay, well, I knew that specific plot point was going to happen at some point. I didn't know where, I didn't know exactly how, and I didn't know all of the things that would be put together in order to lead us to that point. And to me, that's more interesting. I walk away going, oh, they handled that well. The foreshadowing was, it was really well put together. I appreciated what they were doing here, and I kind of love the way that they moved the needle there. If I don't have any perspective or any idea what's going to happen in a movie, I might be more excited about how we got there in that initial reveal. But quite frankly, at least from my point of view, there's a likely chance too, that my perspective will then change over the course of, I don't know, another watch, a couple years, or something in between, because I've seen this happen before. You see this happen on the internet all the time, where people initially praise something as being one of the best things ever, or, they're incredibly excited about it because they were highly anticipating it. They went to see it with their friends. It was the excitement of having watched it for the first time, not knowing anything that was going to happen in it, and that was painting their perspective of it. It's the recency bias of modern filmmaking, especially when you're talking about big blockbuster movies. And to me, probably most indicative in the last decade or so is The Force Awakens, J.J. Abrams' movie. And I know he's really big about the mystery box and not knowing anything before you go into watching that movie, but I knew what was going to happen. I mean, it was easily to guess, the big twists that were happening here and there. And I was a little late on that train in going to see that movie, so obviously people had already spoiled it for me, some of the bigger things, and I watched it thinking, yeah, this movie is incredibly mediocre. The things that are supposed to grab my attention and distract me from the mediocrity at play on screen weren't doing so, because, I wasn't going to be shocked about them, and I walked away thinking, yeah, I don't really like that movie. And in subsequent years, I feel like people have come around to that perspective. I feel like a lot of people would argue that The Force Awakens is the best in the sequel trilogy. I don't know. But the point there being that a lot of people have come to sour on that film. Possibly because they were enthralled by the spectacle of it, because they didn't know what to look at going in, and they were hyper-focusing on their experience watching that initial movie, but having gone back, rewatched, re-experienced it for themselves, especially outside of that big push, or at least the excitement of being in the theater itself, they rethink it. Same thing with Spider-Man No Way Home. Decent film. Knowing everything that was going to happen before I walked into that movie, it was good. I liked it and everything. And then you're seeing a lot of people online talking about how, man, if you really kind of sit there and watch it, it feels like a sitcom, because there's awkward pauses because they were expecting people to clap in the theater, and it just feels kind of like a dry film. And a lot of stuff happening, but not really a whole lot going on there, and people have a different perspective on it because they allowed themselves to get pushed up in the hype, the non-spoiler hype. Like, don't tell me what's going to happen. I'm going to avoid it at all costs and everything in that regard. I'm going to go see it. And again, like I'm saying, this is a conspiracy theory because I feel like that only benefits the people who are actively making money off of other people's excitement. When we can have legitimate conversations about a particular piece of media from the moment it's announced all the way to release, and even though we get some perspective leaks about some concept art for something like Doomsday, it gives us an idea of what the movie's going to be about, or it gives us ideas of certain scenes that either might or might not be cut. This could all just be like planned marketing for all we know, but it gives us an idea, but it doesn't necessarily tell us what's going to happen or some of the bigger beats. And even if it does, it doesn't necessarily ruin your experience watching the movie. Just go watch the movie. See if those scenes are indicative of what you saw in the concept art, and then have a perspective there. This idea that spoilers are killing excitement is, I think, wrong-headed. Obviously, we have a problem on social media. People saying things out in the void, talking about things that they want to talk about, or actively farming this engagement for their own pocketbooks. That's something that is obviously happening, and it's pushing people in one direction or another. Obviously, like, you can sit there and look at these leaks or any leaks for any major movie and just keep farming that content over and over and over again for people to get more angry or more excited or something else like that. And by the time you go and watch the movie, you've kind of already painted your perspective on what you think about this. Is it going to be great? Is it going to be bad? Whatever. But the vast majority of people on social media, I think, are focusing on their excitement. They want to discuss it. And whether it's right or wrong or indicative of what's going on here, social media is everyone's third place, or at least the vast majority of people's third place, where they can go have friends, talk about this stuff, and interact with each other for the things that they're excited about. And I think that that's good. I think the discussion we're having here isn't really about spoilers or ruining movies for yourself or other people. I think it's kind of who's making money off of this stuff and what is their purpose in doing so. With studios, with the marketing agencies and everything, they want people to go and watch the movies for themselves. Meaning they don't want people to be talking about or spoiling things for other people, because that might give other people incentive to not go see it. Oh, well, this happened. I didn't want that to happen, so I'm not going to go see it, or I'm going to wait for streaming, or I'm just going to give up on this franchise altogether. That's why the spoiler culture or lack or anti-spoiler culture, like those things have become more prominent over the last decade. That's my conspiracy. But the rest of it is people online who are actively making buckets and buckets and buckets of money on this stuff, either intentionally hyping people up to the extent that nothing can ever reach the level of excitement that people are anticipating. I think we saw that pretty aggressively with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Or you're talking about something where people are talking about spoilers or things that are going to happen and actively giving their audience something to get mad about and pushing this perspective of, well, it's never going to be good. They ruined it from the outset, and I hate this. So I'm not going to see it, or I'm going to go see it, and I'm going to get mad at it and tell other people how bad it is for my own perspective, or I just want to be part of this group. The point here is I don't think that there's anything wrong with spoiler culture. I don't think that there's anything wrong with looking at these leaks and talking about what it means for the overall film or the series as a whole. I think the problem is the way that we interact with ourselves about this. You can either go into any project spoiler free, or you can know everything going in. That's really up to you. I don't think that there is a problem with spoiler culture. I don't think that this is something that is indicative of the way that we're interacting with media and anything in that regard. I just don't. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments, because frankly, I have been mindful of this for a very long time, and I haven't necessarily discussed it on this or any other channel, something I've been wanting to cover for a while now, and this felt like a decent place to kind of start this conversation. So tell me what your thoughts are. Like the video. Obviously, it's always important for people to like these videos, and especially if you're interacting with them and have anything to say, whether it's good or bad, like dislike, whatever you want to do. But let's discuss in the comments, because I frankly feel like people are going way overboard when it comes to the way we interact with spoilers and everybody else on an online sphere. And again, there's that conspiracy-minded thing where studios and market heads and stuff, like those guys are the ones really pushing this. Don't spoil anything. See it for yourself. Do all this other stuff. Make sure to give us money and, then, I don't know, promote it, badmouth it, no such thing as bad press, that type of stuff. Like, that's my perspective. Let's discuss in the comments. All right, guys, just a lot of frustration here in today's episode, I know, but bear with me. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Dexter franchise. I recently did a video talking about Dexter Original Sin, Dexter Resurrection in the universe as a whole, as well as a retrospective with some of the old videos I've posted on this channel put together for your viewing pleasure. And I appreciated talking about that at the time because I was excited for the finale of Dexter Original Sin, as well as the continuation of Dexter Resurrection. That being said, obviously, time being what it is, Dexter Original Sin has come and gone. The first season is done. And despite my best wishes, there doesn't seem to have been a direct tease for Dexter Resurrection within that finale. I mean, obviously, we got the tease for Dexter Resurrection in the first part of the original premiere of the prequel series, where he's on the hospital bed and his life is flashing before his eyes, and now we're kind of in that universe, right? Seeing his younger self, getting this new iteration of Dexter's youth played out in front of us, even though it's really inconsistent with what was addressed in the first 8 seasons of the original show, but you're just going to have to play with that however you want in your mind. A lot of it, at least for me right now, is that he was misremembering it in the original show. What we're seeing in Original Sin is exactly what happened. But again, take that with a grain of salt or interact with these shows however you want. Just ignore those scenes in the original series, ignore Original Sin if you want. I mean, there's just a lot. But frankly, one of the things that I was really hoping for, like I said, is some kind of tease for what Resurrection would be. Whether that was, I don't know, a trailer. I mean, they've been filming it. They could give us some indication of what's going to happen in that show at the very end of that, even if it wasn't directly connected with the story being told in Original Sin. But more than that, I really wanted something to directly tie in. Something that would give Dexter a reason to wake up on that hospital bed, like a realization, a memory of something that happened in his youth that was going to propel him forward, whether that was a character in his past or a serial killer he let go or anything else like that. And I'm going to talk about spoilers for Original Sin here, so obviously take that with a grain of salt before you continue to watch. But, at the beginning of the series, there was at least some implication that there was 2 serial killers kind of coexisting around the same time. Obviously, there was the Spencer stuff where he was kidnapping kids and everything, and we knew that that was going to be the big sticking point of that season. I don't think that that story came together very well, and a lot of lingering questions as to what was going on or why he was doing all of this stuff. But again, decent show regardless of some of the lingering issues I had with it. The point there being, they had this other serial killer. And at least in the first couple of episodes, I thought, okay, there's this serial killer coming up around the exact same time Dexter is. Interesting perspective here. Maybe this is something that balloons and gives something for Dexter to be like, oh, like that's what's happening here. Or that guy got away or something else like that. Of course, that didn't happen. It ended up being Brian, who was the serial killer who was coming up around the same time as Dexter. And we saw the interaction between Brian and Harry, even though the last scene in the very first season was like, okay, Brian is still around and they're going to be building this tension or building that character relationship while not stepping on the toes of the first season of the original show, but they're going to be building Brian as a character to, I guess, give a little bit more of a thematic punch to the way you go back and rewatch the first season. Maybe that's what they're trying to do here. Ultimately, my point here, at least my disappointment, is there was no real thematic connection between Dexter Original Sin and Dexter Resurrection, where something that happened in the prequel would at least indicate or speak to what's going to happen in Resurrection. Give Dexter a reason to get off that table and go forth into his future adventure And then potentially in Resurrection, talking to his younger self or interacting with his younger self, trying to remember things as they happen, and then set up the second season of Original Sin and back and forth. There's no connection to these series. They're just happening simultaneously. And that's just what we've come to expect from universes or extended universes on television on a broader scale. They exist despite each other, and they're telling separate but connected stories because of the same characters in different time periods or just the same universe as a whole. We've seen a lot of that in The Walking Dead. I don't want to relitigate that issue with this video. The point here is after Original Sin, even though they haven't given a second season update for that, anticipating one for sure, but like they haven't talked about it yet, there is some implication that outside of the Trinity Killer show that they're already putting together, they're going to be focusing on more spinoffs in the upcoming future, with the implication that theoretically any potential spinoff from Resurrection could be used to prop up the second season of that show. Essentially, Resurrection will be used to introduce a big bad or a new serial killer or a new character in particular, and then that character could get an origin story or get some kind of continuation from there if they spark an interest with fans more than anything. And quite frankly, if you look at the cast list for Resurrection, it makes sense. They're bringing in some heavy hitters. We have a lot of people that you wouldn't anticipate being in a Dexter show, showing up and being in a Dexter show. I would love to see more people show up and potentially get a sequel series or some kind of spin-off origin story or whatever it is to help inform what's going on with Dexter, because that would be the thing that, at least from my perspective, would help heal the criticism I have with not only the Dexter Extended Universe, but TV Extended Universes as a whole, because interaction, communication, stuff that props up new series or the next season of a completely different show or something else like that would be warranted, something that I could get behind and be excited about. Like, each individual show is its own separate entity, yes, but it gives you something to think about and get excited for the next show. That to me is the real sign of strength when it comes to an extended universe of television, and something that I would love to see explored more in the future. And who knows if that's going to happen. I think the big point I'm trying to make here is, despite everything, Dexter Original Sin was a decent first step, or at least an interesting reintroduction into the Dexter character. It gave us something to focus on a little bit more than the original show, which I think the original show's perspective was, here's Pinocchio, can he be a real boy, right? Like, Dexter is trying to feel emotion, he's trying to build a family, he's trying to find people that he can connect with, and ultimately he decides, I cannot do that. Original Sin is more like, this is a monster at play, he's being built up, and something is feeding the beast. Whether like he's just getting started, he's learning who he is, and he's going to just be who he wants to be. He's not hyper-focusing on what his future is going to bring. He's trying to become Dexter. And I think that that was interesting. It gave a different perspective. My hope is that Resurrection will do something similar. A lot of people are talking about wanting to see Dexter Unchained, not caring about anything and going after this person, that person, being literally put on a leash, but like in a darker sense. I mean, there's a whole lot of speculation about what this show is going to be. I don't really appreciate any of the pitches I've heard. I'm really hoping they can find a real direction forward and not just redo what they did in the original series, and frankly, what they did with New Blood. New Blood gave us no real meaningful connection to Dexter. It was like, can Dexter be a father figure? Which is like, okay, but that's just essentially season 9. Like, we're relitigating the thing that we got to the very end of the series, understanding the answer to, right? Pinocchio cannot be a real boy. Dexter cannot have these meaningful connections to people. And you had Dexter's dark passenger in the form of Deborah the entire time in New Blood saying, yeah, you're just going to hurt everything that you touch. You're just going to continue to hurt everyone. We've been through this before. Why are we relitigating this same issue? And quite frankly, I don't want to see any more of that. I feel like that's one of the reasons why New Blood really failed, at least for me. And if they're going to continue it, if they have a story here, I do hope it's worth finding the middle ground here and figuring out a way to express who Dexter is as a person in a different light than what we've seen him in the original show, Original Sin, and New Blood. But I guess time isn't really of the essence here. We're just gonna have to wait and see. That's my little rant about Dexter. Again, guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Helps out the channel a lot, literally costs you nothing. I really hope everyone is enjoying the content. I'm trying my best to make as much as I can. I'm going to talk to you guys later. Hope everyone's having a fantastic day.